Hello and welcome to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg, and this is a podcast all about astrology, divination, and the threads of fate that weave throughout all of our lives. Today, we are back with another forecast episode, and in this one, we are going to be looking at the astrology of March and unpacking it transit by transit. So let's go ahead and begin at the top of the month on March 2nd when Mars enters Pisces. Now, we have been having Mars move through Aquarius for quite a while. And when Mars is in Aquarius, our actions become a lot more oriented towards what is logical, what is rational, what makes the most sense to do. When Mars moves into Pisces, the way that we approach taking action in the world shifts. It becomes a lot more emotionally inclined, it becomes a lot more intuitive, and it becomes a lot more compassionate. This can look like fighting for people who cannot fight for themselves. This can look like really relying on your intuition to guide you to the next step that you need to take. But it is also going to be an amplification in the Pisces part of your chart. We already have a couple planets moving through that sign right now. In fact, we have the Sun, Venus, and Mercury, plus the North Node, all moving through Pisces. So Mars is going to come in and stir some shit up and probably going to let us know what is not feeling very good. Now, the Pisces part of our charts has been undergoing a massive reconstruction since 2023. We have had Saturn moving through this sign, and Neptune's been there for a very, very long time, and both of them just left this year. So we are really understanding this part of our chart in a whole new light. We're currently undergoing a Mercury retrograde through this sign as well. So there's a lot of rethinking about how we're approaching this area of our lives. And Mars is going to move into Pisces on March 2nd and start helping us get really strategic about how we want to proceed. And this can feel a little bit confusing because Mercury is still retrograde. So there's still going to be questions around how we want to move, what the best way is to move. And Mars is going to come in and be like, all right, it's time to stop thinking and it's time to start doing. And that might create a little bit of internal conflict with yourself because you probably still aren't incredibly clear on where you want to go yet because Mercury is retrograde. Mars doesn't really care about that. Mars wants to get from point A to point B in the most direct and effective way as possible. So Mars is going to come into Pisces on March 2nd and be like, all right, guys, it's time to get things done. You know, one of the ways that I think about Mars and Pisces in general is that it kind of spiritualizes our movement, right? It's very good for things like martial arts, yoga, qigong, but it is also less directional movement in a way that I think can be sometimes disorienting for Mars until they get into that final part of Pisces where they actually have a good bit of dignity by decan and bound. And what that means is that there are different parts of different zodiac signs that are more or less supportive and comfortable for certain planets to move through. Mars does really well at the end of Pisces, but the first two decans, the first roughly 20 degrees of this sign, Mars is going to struggle a little bit more. Mars is okay there, but it's not going to be the most comfortable because in Pisces, we see two different modes of being appear, right? This is a mutable sign, so it always is going to produce two or more of something. When you think about the imagery that is associated with Pisces, it's two fish, but it's two fish that are swimming in two different directions, which highlights a tension between spirit and matter, reality and illusion, hope and reality as well. And that is going to be a little bit challenging because Mars doesn't want to be moving in two directions at once. Mars doesn't want to feel pulled into one area and then have an idea about another direction that he could go in. And that is why sometimes Mars can feel a little bit disoriented in Pisces. And how that tends to manifest in our lived experience is feeling like you're being pulled in two different directions. Like you have to come over here and take care of something, but also you need to move over there and take care of something else. And that can create a little bit of difficulty when Mars wants to be moving in that A to B linear fashion. So if you're experiencing kind of this tension within yourself of wanting to be going in multiple directions, doing multiple things, expressing yourself in multiple ways, and finding tension within that, then you are honestly right on time. You are par for the course with the astrology of the moment in the early parts of March. Now, Mars is also going to bring a certain amount of agency into Pisces, right? A certain amount of urgency, excuse me, which means Mars is going to be feeling a pressure to move faster, accomplish more, and get shit done, which is already going to be challenged by Mercury's retrograde, right? The mind is saying, slow down, go back, rethink. We've got to figure this out now that Saturn and Neptune aren't here. And Mars is saying, let's go. We need to get this done yesterday. There's no more time to think. There's no more time to reorient ourselves here. We just have to make progress now that these weights and these illusions and confusions and delusions have kind of moved out of this area of life. Mars wants to take action here. This is going to feel more challenging for people who have day charts. So, if you were born with your sun above the ascendant descendant axis, Mars is your most challenging planet, which means wherever Mars is transiting through at a certain time, you are going to be spending more time, more energy, and more resources in that area of life. And usually it's not because things are going well, but it's because you are trying to put out fires, right? Things are becoming inflamed by Mars's presence there, and that is going to require more of your attention and more of your energy to navigate. So you can kind of expect that for the next few weeks, as Mars moves through Pisces, that there's going to be some ruptures and some discomfort in the Pisces part of your chart, and that this is just, the standard movement, ebbs and flows. Mars moves through a sign in about 6 weeks. And, we're going to be looking at Mars in Aries after this, which is a much different energy. Mars will be conjoining Saturn in Aries as well. So this is kind of a little bit of the calm before the storm, but in all honesty, February kind of kicked the storm off for most of us, and now we are just moving through it. This is going to be better for anyone who is in a Mars ruled perfection. So if you are in an Aries perfection year or a Scorpio perfection year, then Mars's transit through Pisces should actually feel better because Mars has triplicity dignity in water signs. And what that means is that Mars is in his element in water signs. And so he inherently is going to feel more comfortable there, right? There is some discomfort with not being able to move in a linear direction, but Mars finds support from people in his community that can really make this transit feel a little bit easier. So if you are struggling during this Mars and Pisces transit, especially in the Pisces part of your life, then, don't be afraid to ask for help because that triplicity dignity is what grants the aid and the support of people around you to smooth things over and make things a little bit easier on the planet, in this case, Mars. So that's a little bit on the Mars and Pisces transit. Just be prepared for some discomfort there. I always think of Mars as like a cattle prod, the thing that they stick into the fire and then they press it against the cow to get them moving. Mars is that hot, pokey, prickly thing that stirs you into action, right? That is going to make you get up, to make you go, whoa, what was that? And then start moving, right? And you can kind of imagine that Mars's entry into Pisces on the second is like getting struck with that cattle prod in the Pisces part of your chart, where it really is going to start ramping up and moving at a much faster rate. And that is going to, again, feel a little bit confusing because Mercury is still retrograde there, which we will talk about as we move through the month, because there's going to be a couple important things that Mercury does in Pisces this month. Now, on March 3rd, we are going to have a lunar eclipse at 12 degrees of Virgo. So, yes, we are still in eclipse season. We are still dealing with all of the ways in which these eclipses are bringing things to light, are changing our inherent patterns around how we want to approach the Virgo and Pisces part of our lives. There have been a lot of things coming out in the news cycles lately that are very much associated with eclipses, like the downfall of influential figures and things of that nature. But I always say that eclipses are agents of fate, right? Fate can be cruel, fate can be kind, and eclipses are going to push you closer and closer to your destiny. That doesn't always mean they feel good. Sometimes it just means that they are getting you where you need to be. And at that moment, when you are in it, when you're in the eye of the storm, you can't necessarily see where you're going, right? You can feel that things are changing. You know that worlds are beginning and ending, and doors are opening and closing, and that there's more potential and more possibilities that you weren't able to see prior to this. And sometimes that feels really hard. Sometimes we don't want to walk through a new door. Sometimes we don't want something to end. And unfortunately, this eclipse is going to be one that is more associated with endings, release, and letting things go. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the chart for the eclipse itself so we can kind of talk through what some of this looks like together. If you're watching the video version, this will be helpful. And if you're listening to the audio one, I will do my best to describe what exactly it is that we are looking at here. In On March 3rd, we're going to have the eclipse at 12 degrees of Virgo, which means that anyone who has mutable placements around 12 degrees, particularly from about 9 to 15 degrees of mutable signs, you are going to be feeling this one more intensely because you're having personal activations that are saying that this eclipse is more significant for you. Now we have the moon down here in Virgo conjunct the south node. We have the sun up here in Pisces conjunct the north node, and the sun is hanging out with Mercury retrograde, Venus in Pisces, and a freshly ingressed Mars in Pisces, along with the asteroid Pallas Athena. So there's a lot going on in Pisces, right? And because of that, that means there are massive ways in which that area of our life is going through changes, right? As I mentioned at the very beginning, we've had Saturn and Neptune recently leave Pisces, and now we have clarity over what it is we want to achieve there, and only more clarity is going to come as Mercury finishes up its retrograde cycle. There is an urge and an ambition that says we want to become more in the Pisces part of our chart right now. And in order to grasp what is emerging there, we have to let something go in the way that we are approaching the Virgo part of our lives, right? So this eclipse is one that is more associated with the principle of release. And honestly, if there was a key word that I could give you for this eclipse, it's surrender. It is saying that we have to be willing to let things go and also to clean house in order to make space for new things in our lives. This eclipse is also just a little bit harder on the body. It always is a little bit tougher every month when the moon conjoins the south node because the moon is responsible for our physical bodies and our health. And so when we have that planet conjoining another um, body, let's say it's not a planet, the south node, then it is going to kind of dry her out. And that drying out can translate very literally into us feeling exhausted, fatigued, and under the weather. On top of that, the moon is going to be opposing Mars by sign during this eclipse. Mars and the moon, when they are opposed to one another, it tends to heighten physical tension in the body and also tends to bring up more opportunities for conflict in our relationships, right? It is a feeling of being irritable, on edge, and snapping a little bit faster because of that. It's like when you don't sleep all night and you're tired, you're exhausted, and someone says something to you in the wrong way, and you just kind of like snap back at them. And then you walk away from it feeling like you probably shouldn't have said that and you didn't handle it in the best way. That is usually like a moon Mars opposition. It doesn't have to be anything catastrophic or major, but and we have them every single month. So it's nothing new to any of us, but it is usually a time where we feel it a little bit harder, especially if you've got a day chart. And because Mars is that principle of violence or pain, when we have the body planet opposing, right, in an oppositional, conflictual relationship with the planet of violence and pain, then we can tend to feel more suffering in our bodies on that day. Again, this happens every month, so it's nothing to be entirely concerned about, but just to say that this eclipse is a little bit more prickly, it is a lot more uncomfortable, and it's going to be harder on the body because that moon is getting kind of wrecked a little bit, right? It's also the moon in Virgo being ruled by this fallen, detriment, retrograde Mercury. Mercury is not in good shape in this chart, right, on this day, and is responsible for resourcing the moon, who it is also in a conflictual relationship with. And all of that is just kind of technical jargon to say that it's going to feel confusing and it's going to feel exhausting. And if you can just take it easy on this day, then that would be what I would recommend the most. You can expect that there's going to be a call to kind of let something slip through your fingers in the Virgo area of your life. I often imagine the South Node as almost creating like a hole in the floor, and it's a void that things just fall into. And as they fall into them, it clears space for us to accomplish and achieve new things in whatever the other part of the chart is that is opposed to the South Node. So in this case, that would be Pisces, right? So if you feel like there are things that are just falling away from you at this time in the Virgo part of your chart, that is very, very normal. It is associated with loss, it is associated with reckonings, it's associated with surrender. And we have to be willing to ride that wave, even if we don't necessarily think it sounds very fun. And I can assure you, I don't think it sounds very fun. However, it is still happening, right? there's kind of a mixed bag in sense of that part is going to be tough, but the sun is also being ruled by this exalted Jupiter who's about to station direct, which is really interesting, right? Because Jupiter is the planet of optimism and hope and possibility and abundance, and is in this really beautiful aspect to the sun where it wants to provide support, it wants to provide aid, it wants to provide a glass half full perspective. And so as we are letting go of things in the Virgo part of our chart, we might also feel more of a budding optimism about the possibilities of what we can achieve in the Pisces part of our chart. This eclipse is happening in the second decans of Virgo and Pisces, right? So the moon is in that second decan of Virgo. And in that area, we tend to feel very concerned with the pursuit of perfection. We want to get everything just right, just so. And because of that, it can be more of a struggle when we are not doing things in a perfect way. And because the moon is conjunct the south node, this is asking us to release our grip on perfection and to realize that the pursuit of perfection is actually something that is harmful and damaging to us. Sometimes we have to realize that our best is good enough and that we are actually only self sabotaging by believing that we can create something perfect when that's actually a futile journey. The sun is in the second decan of Pisces, which is a part of the zodiac that is deeply concerned with both finding inner and material fulfillment. It wants to have that spiritual abundance and it also wants to have material security and learning ways in which it can go out and seek answers to big questions and still find riches of all kinds as a result of that exploration is part and parcel to what we find in that second decan of Pisces. Both the second decan of Pisces and the second decan of Virgo are associated with success, with someone kind of getting to a place where they feel very comfortable on their own. And so this eclipse, it might feel a little bit more lonely. It might feel like you've strived to achieve something and that now you're being asked to let go of a certain kind of dream to attach yourself more fully to another one that you know is going to bring deeper emotional satisfaction, but that there's no one else who truly understands what you're going through because you've built it yourself. You've got there yourself, right? And that is part of why we see this being the second decan and not the third. And the third decan of both Virgo and Pisces, we see the loneliness go away and there is a replacement with relationships coming in both of those decans that weren't present in the previous ones. So there might be a little bit more of a solo kind of quality at this time, and because Venus is in Pisces approaching her exaltation degree, she's very, very powerful. And she is kind of going to be the one that we are relying on to bring us more ease and support during this time. This feels like figuring out what we need to let go of so that we can devote ourselves more fully to something. Venus is that principle of devotion and love, right? She wants to create things, she wants to bring them into being, but she also wants it to feel good. And in order for us to feel good about what we are achieving in Pisces, we need to let go of certain narratives, ideas, practices, and expectations that we have of ourselves and others in the Virgo part of our charts, right? And that is why this eclipse is about surrender. It's about surrendering so that something else can be born, but we cannot get there until we release something. And that is really going to be the kind of major message that we find with this eclipse in Virgo on March 3rd. Take care of yourself, be kind to yourself on this day. Rest if you can. It's a Tuesday, so obviously most of us are going to be working, but if you're able to cut out a little bit early, if you're able to prioritize sleep, rest, nourishment, please, please do so. Don't skip lunch to keep working, those types of things where you're making a choice between productivity or nourishing your body. The choice on this day should absolutely be to nourish your body. You don't want to get yourself into a position where you feel burnt out and run down in a way that you can't recover from, especially when we've got a whole week ahead of us, right? So just take care of yourselves and be kind and compassionate with others. Mercury still retrogrades. There's a big chance of saying things where you're kind of doing the foot in your mouth sort of situation and wishing you said something a little bit better. So move intentionally, speak intentionally, right? And if you're feeling exhausted at the start of the day, then maybe, remember that as you move through the day. And remember that as you're having conversations with other people, because there can be a tendency to not communicate in the most effective ways with Mercury being retrograde in the sign of their fall and detriment, and that being a massive influence on this lunation. All right. Now, moving on from the eclipse, on March 6th, we are going to have Venus entering Aries. This is going to be a big shift, right? One of the biggest ones that we see from the benefic Venus leaving the sign of her exaltation, where she is considered to be a special guest, right? She is kind of like a VIP in Pisces. She loves to be there. She wants to elevate everybody else when she's there, right? She also wants to take care of anybody else staying there because they reflect on her, status as well. And so Venus in Pisces is a sweeter one. Now, as Venus moves into Aries, there's going to be a change in the ways that we are relating and connecting with other people. Venus in Aries is a lot more independent. She's a lot more fiery. She's more ambitious. She's a go getter. She's less about letting things kind of go with the flow and enjoying them as they arise and really devoting herself to these kind of worldly principles and otherworldly principles. And now she's in Aries and she wants to fight for the things that she loves. She has been placed on the battlefield where she is forced to operate in an environment that feels really uncomfortable for her, right? That is because it is the sign of her detriment, which means it falls opposite one of her home signs, which is Libra. You can imagine when you are as far away from home as you can possibly be, you also are not going to feel as comfortable, right? You're not going to feel like you know how to operate there in the same way. You're going to have to adopt new modes of being in order to survive and to thrive there. And it is the same exact thing for Venus. I often think of Venus and Aries as kind of being a nurse on the battlefield. She is still Venus. She is still this person or this figure who is trying to provide care and compassion, but instead she's doing it in an environment where everything is burning and on fire and falling apart and where there is violence and difficulty. This is the quintessential love is a battlefield kind of placement, right? This is where we go to fight for our values, for our desires, and pleasure. And it also tends to buck back against the status quo for how we're supposed to love, how we're supposed to create, live deliciously. And it can create this desire to rebel against stereotypical ways of relating and stereotypical beauty standards in order to find something that is more authentic. Aries is the exaltation of the sun. And what that means is that the sun has just as much to do with Aries as Mars does. And because of that, in Aries, we have to move in a way that feels true and honest to ourselves. So when Venus is in Aries, she's not as considerate of what feels the best for everyone else, what is going to make the group dynamic work as well for everyone else. Venus in Aries is much more concerned with the self. Venus in Aries asks herself, what do I want out of this? And how do I get it? Right? Because we are in a Mars ruled sign. So action is going to be a core principle of what we see here. Venus is not sitting around ruminating on her desires in Aries. She's going after them and sometimes doing that in a way that is going to attract some type of criticism because not only is she rebelling against the status quo when it comes to conventional relationship dynamics, excuse me, and the conventional beauty standards, right? But she is also forced to really think about how she is going to express herself in a way that feels true, authentic, and independent. I think of Venus and Aries as often kind of being like the hot shot. She wants to wear the pants in the relationship sort of thing. She wants to be in control. She doesn't want to be micromanaged, in any sense of the form. And so this transit is going to bring, a little bit of a balm into the Aries part of our chart, but it's also going to change the way that we are approaching everything that Venus has her hands in for the next couple of weeks. Now, Venus in Aries is going to be an interesting one, right? Because Venus is a benefic, which means she is a good doer. That is what benefic translates to. She wants to bring support, affirmation, ease, beauty, joy, pleasure wherever she is moving, regardless of if she feels comfortable doing it there. Right. And so in Aries, Venus is going to attempt to affirm and support what is happening in that area of our lives. But she is met with a little bit of difficulty because she is not the only guest in Aries right now. Saturn and Neptune are also hanging out there. This is going to help make that feel a little bit easier, but it is also going to bring up different challenges as Venus conjoins Saturn at 2 degrees of Aries. Now, Venus is still going to feel like a benefic, right? So it's still going to bring some support, more support for night charts who are in particular getting the Aries part of their life kind of rocked right now with Saturn being there because Saturn's your most difficult planet. So this should bring a little bit of a balm and a little bit of a soothing energy into the Aries area of your life. If you have a day chart, it might feel like you're kind of, wondering what she's doing there and not necessarily feeling the support as much, but it can also bring more of an allure, more of a magnetism, more an attractiveness into the Aries part of our chart. So the thing with this is that detriment planets tend to feel awkward. They feel uncomfortable. So Venus in Aries is going to feel a little bit awkward. She's going to have to psych herself up to go do Venus things, but she can still do that, right? So if you are looking to accomplish something in the Aries part of your chart or to move it forward or to build something there because Saturn and Neptune are demanding that of you right now, this Venus and Aries transit should help. But just remember that she's still in a sign that is going to require her to, give herself a little bit of a pep talk before she's able to run onto the battlefield to provide that care and compassion for the wounded, let's say. She will be in her own bounds of Aries from March 11th to the 15th, which will help. So that will be a little bit supportive for those couple of days. But if you're in a Venus perfection year, so if you are in a Taurus or a Libra perfection year, then this one's going to be a little bit harder for you. Your time lord is going to be going through it a bit more, which means that you are going to be going through it a bit more. You're probably going to feel a little bit less resourced, a little bit under the weather. Take care of yourself, be kind to yourself, and leave some space and some room for you to maybe not have to go as hard or have as many plans as you normally do. Now, on the 8th, Venus is going to conjoin at Saturn at 2 degrees of Aries. So we are continuing the story of Venus moving through Mars's sign. And now she is being met with like a, nasty kind of like cold shower as she gets in there, right? If you think like of Venus and Aries is entering onto the hot beach as she's getting out of the water in Pisces, and she's kind of like, ooh, I don't really like this here. It's a little bit too hot for me. It's a little bit too dry, and now she's running into a even drier force, which is Saturn. And so this is really going to suck Venus out of any moisture that she has. And moisture is a principle of emotion, intuitiveness, and connectivity, right? That is part of why Venus loves to be in moist environments. She likes to be able to connect and cohere and relate. And that is harder to do in Aries because it is such a hot and dry sign. It is also hard to do when Saturn's around because Saturn is an extremely cold and dry planet. So now we have this principle of connection really being tested. And how that tends to manifest in our life is that our relationships go through a bit of a stress test. This doesn't have to be romantic relationships. This can be friendships. This can be your relationship with your coworkers, right? And depending on the part of your chart that Aries occupies, that is going to tell you where you are going to be experiencing a little bit more relational restraint and limitations, right? This can be really supportive for stating your boundaries in relationships. But just remember that Mercury is still going to be retrograde in Pisces. So even though, it can be supportive for that, there can still be ways of miscommunicating or saying it not in a super coherent fashion. Detriment Venus and fallen Saturn coming together is just a little bit of a rough one. It can kind of bring up this feeling of like, oh, here's how everything sucks, actually. Don't you hate it? Which is not fun, right? It's kind of gross, but it's going to feel like probably a little bit disappointing. Like I can't imagine March 8th being like a super fun day for most people. And that's okay. Not every day is going to be super enjoyable, but because Neptune is also co-present, it feels like Venus is being forced to recognize that there is this dreamy quality that she wants to lean into, that she wants to feel like, oh, we can all be like connected and supported and in love with each other. And then she like runs straight into Saturn, and Saturn's like, actually, no, you can't. And here's why you can't. And here are the boundaries that you need to be enforcing in your relationships. And here are all the ways in which you feel like a failure, right? Because Saturn can bring up that feeling of imposter syndrome, doubt, fear. So all of those things are now going to be put onto our relationships, to our creative practices, to our modes and methods of enjoying our pleasures and desires in life. And that's harder. Venus doesn't want to be told no, and Saturn is a planet of no's. And so Saturn is going to say no to what Venus is trying to do, which is bring support into the Aries part of your chart. So on March 8th, it's a little bit of a power struggle between two planets who are already weakened by being in a sign that they're not comfortable in and who are also working at cross purposes with one another. One of the more beneficial ways that this can play out is making commitments. But if you do make a commitment on this day or commit to someone or a creation or something like that, make sure you're truly committed because the passion will fizzle out. And do you want to continue to show up for the thing even when it's hard and even when you're not excited about it anymore, right? That is really going to be what is important here. Venus is helping Saturn, but Saturn's harming Venus. So everyone is a little bit uncomfortable, but it can bring up opportunities to do things in a very different fashion, right? Like Saturn and Venus together are a signifier of queerness and of relating and creating things that are different and outside of the norm and are kind of intended for the misfits. And I feel like, if you are making things, make something ugly this day, challenge the way that we think that we are supposed to relate or connect or create, and you are going to be giving this alignment, a different way to manifest that might actually feel better or feel more supportive to you because you're kind of allowing it to show up in your life in a way that still meets the significations, but doesn't necessarily create extra difficulty. Sometimes we don't have a choice because fate is going to do its thing, but sometimes we can, try to steer things in a certain direction. And that is the beauty of knowing astrology. All right. So that's going to be March 8th, where we have the Venus Saturn conjunction in Aries. But the day before that, we are going to have the Mercury cazimi at 16 degrees of Pisces, which is actually quite nice, right? Cazimis are moments where a planet gets within 1 degree of the sun. And when they do that, they are said to be protected from its rays. The sun is a very hot, dry planet. It burns things, it scorches, right? It can cause us to go blind if we look at it for too long. And so when planets get too close to the sun, they become harmed by how hard and strong and hot and dry that planet is, right? It's like they get a sunburn essentially. Now, when a planet gets within 1 degree of the sun, however, they become protected from that heat. They become protected from that damage. And all of a sudden, we are seeing that principle become illuminated in a new way. And with Mercury signifying communication, tech, travel, commerce, our thought processes, all of those things become highlighted. And so Mercury cazimis in particular tend to bring aha moments. This is happening in Pisces, which is a nocturnal sign. So it might feel more internal rather than external. This might feel like a deepening awareness over all of the changes and shifts that have been happening in that area of life and like some clarity arising around how you want to progress forward, which should be really supportive for Mars, who is trying to get things moving, right? This is a big check-in moment in the Pisces parts of our charts. And after all of the drama of Saturn and Neptune and the eclipses, clarity has been in short supply. It's almost like there's been this restless, heated kind of, I need to achieve something there, but I just don't know how, and I don't know what, and I don't know how to get there. And I feel like I'm moving slow, and now I'm moving backwards. And realizing that what you thought existed there for the last decade or so wasn't the whole truth. And now we are being forced to contend with the fact that, oh, there's things that I didn't consider about this. There are things that I was so deep in that I couldn't see the full picture, right? The fog has lifted, and now you can see the landscape that you are navigating, and that might require you to make some changes. This Mercury cazimi is a seeding, right? It can help us make sense of where we are and where we want to go at the same time, which is really nice. And the co-presence with Mars is also like, okay, do something about it, right? This can bring a little bit of anxiety into the mix if we're not making progress because Mercury and Mars as a combination can set the mind on fire and keep it whirring and moving, which isn't always productive. But having Mars there does mean that we're not just thinking about it. We're not just having this clarity arise or this aha moment or internal awareness coming through and then just sitting on it, right? Mars is going to say, all right, let's time to take action. This is a really good time on the 7th when we do experience this cazimi at 16 degrees of Pisces to spend some time alone, right? To spend some time with your mind, to really journal about the Pisces part of your chart. Like what's changed? What's different? What feels lighter? How has your time horizon around these topics shifted recently, too? What feels like an authentic path forward? And how can you take steps towards that? I would honestly recommend everyone to spend some time journaling about those things. When we do that, when we journal, we are invoking Mercury, right? It is a process where we are taking our thoughts, we are putting them on the page, we are communicating to ourselves, we are able to understand how we are feeling, which is a Pisces sort of orientation towards things, because we have taken the time to think about it, right? Thinking about your feelings is a big Mercury and Pisces thing. And so because of that, if you take some time to write out how you're feeling, you might realize that the clarity is on the page when you're done, even if it wasn't there when you started. So that's going to be March 7th, and that should be a little bit more of a supportive moment, especially for anyone who has placements around 16 degrees of Pisces. Now, on March 11th, we have Jupiter stationing direct at 15 degrees of Cancer, which I am so excited for. Finally, some good things happening in the sky. We've been having Jupiter moving backwards through Cancer for a while. Jupiter loves to be in Cancer. It's the sign of his exaltation. So it's a really supportive place for Jupiter to be in. However, Cancer is a sign that changes every single day because it is ruled by the moon. The moon is never doing the exact same thing hour to hour because she moves so quickly, which means our relationship to the Cancer part of our charts changes at a rapid pace. And so Jupiter in Cancer is trying to bring abundance and support and ease and affirmation and to elevate our baseline experience into something that is more supportive in the part of our chart that Cancer is associated with. Now, when Jupiter's retrograde, that whole process slows down, right? All of the blessings, it doesn't mean that they're not there anymore. It doesn't mean that we can't feel them and that there's no good things coming in, but it does slow down Jupiter's ability to bring about supportive and affirming situations and circumstances that will elevate our baseline. So once Jupiter stations direct, we're going to start seeing things move forward at a much more rapid rate, especially once Jupiter picks up a little bit of speed. Something that I've talked about constantly with this Jupiter and Cancer transit, and I'm going to say it again because I think it's important, is that if you are expecting this transit to feel good every single day, you are going to be disappointed. If you are looking around like, where are my Jupiter blessings? The Cancer part of my chart hasn't changed. There is a good reason for that. And it's because the moon has not been in good shape, right? Like the moon is always changing. There's going to be days where we feel really, really good, where there is a wellspring of support in that area of our lives. And then the moon is going to run into an opposition with Mars or Saturn, and we're going to feel disappointed. So, yes, ebbs and flows are a natural part of this Jupiter and Cancer transit. However, once Jupiter stations direct and starts moving forward, it should veer more on the side of good, positive things happening there that, again, elevate our baseline. And what that means is if let's say this is in the first house, right, of body and health and life direction and perspective. There might feel like there's a lot of ups and downs on your personal journey and that you've been stalled there for a while. But as Jupiter begins to station direct and move forward, there is a lot more optimism that is steeped into your approach to navigating the shifting tides that are occurring in your life, right? So Jupiter is elevating your baseline to be one where you can see things through more of a half glass full perspective. Jupiter is elevating your baseline of health potentially, right? And if it's in the second house, then like the baseline of how much money you make or how much money you spend, right? Your relationship to self support and nourishment might be changing. So when you emerge, you might be making more money than you were prior, even if it wasn't like every day money is coming in, right? So those are the ways that Jupiter tends to slowly over the course of a year take us from point A to point B. But in Cancer, it's much more of an up and down kind of journey to getting there, right? It is filled with both moments of blessings and beauty and also moments of disappointment and hardship because that is the nature of the moon who is always waxing and waning, right? So One of the things that's really nice about Jupiter stationing direct is that this gives Jupiter the ability to start delivering in Cancer. So we should really feel good, right? We're moving forward, we're rebuilding, we're paving things, we're paving our way there that should feel more supportive. The planet of wisdom and belief is no longer looking backwards, but looking forwards. So there should be more movement and more of an ability to tap into a feeling of hope, right? A feeling of faith and trust that things are going to work out. There's a greater kind of well from us to pull from when it comes to friendship and connection and realizing how much that buoys us, right? How much that supports us. Jupiter in Cancer is kind of like that phrase of a rising tide lifts all boats, right? This is the rising tide, and our boats are going to be lifted as a result. So it's going to be more supportive long term. This is also really good for all the electional astrologers out there. We have been wanting to use these Pisces rising charts now that Saturn is gone, but Jupiter has been retrograde. So if you are an electional astrologer like me, which means you use astrology to pick moments to act so that you can align with your desired outcome, then this is going to be really, really helpful for you. If you have no idea what electional astrology is and you want to learn more, I have a course about all of it on my website, which will teach you how to step into the driver's seat with fate and actually use astrology rather than just observe astrology. All right. On March 15th, we are going to have Mercury retrograde conjoining Mars at 10 degrees of Pisces. This is a little bit prickly. This is where we get back into some things feeling not so supportive, right? Mercury retrograde obviously is going to bring up the more of a potential for us to say things that we don't mean, to speak out of turn, right? For there to be confusion and tech errors and travel delays and all of the usual kind of Mercury retrograde shenanigans, right? Everything that Mercury is associated with, commerce, transportation, the mind, communication, are being reworked and revisited in a way that causes us to slow down, to backtrack, and then to retrace our steps in the future when Mercury stations direct. And because we're retracing our steps, that means that whatever comes up on March 15th, when Mercury conjoins Mars, is going to be revisited in the future. This is not the final point in the storyline. So be mindful of what you say and how you move on this day. There is a greater likelihood of experiencing verbal altercations, right? Of getting into fights with people or to say things in a very snappy and frustrated and irritable way. Mercury is the principle of communication, and Mars is going to inflame that, right? So, inflammatory words or words as weapons is a very standard Mercury Mars when they are an aspect, especially a conjunction kind of keyword for you, right? More conflict. Also, watch your fingers. Like if you were chopping vegetables, if you're putting things in the oven, there's just a greater likelihood of like kind of cutting your finger when you are chopping veggies or burning it when you're putting something in the oven because Mars is also cuts and wounds and fire, right? And Mercury is going to rule over the hands. And so you want to be a little bit more mindful also of how you are moving in a very literal way. Something that I'm not super stoked about this is this also feels like rife for spiritual warfare or the weaponization of compassion. So just be a little bit mindful, be on your guard when something sounds a little bit too good to be true on this day because it might be, you know, and like I said before, we're going to revisit whatever comes up here when Mercury stations direct and passes back over this degree. So speak intentionally, you know, this can be one that's harder mentally as well. You know, this can be a sense of like constantly rethinking what you said, how you acted, and getting lost in the whirlpool of that in a way that is not actually supportive, but just kind of puts you into a place of being activated and or regulated or dysregulated, right? It's going to be a little bit harder for day charts because Mars is harder for day charts. And so just be kind of mindful, you know, to take it easy on this day if you can, to speak with intention and to move with compassion and to not weaponize that compassion against another person or other people's. You know, it's kind of just looks like heated exchanges, fighting words, you know, those things that are not necessarily what we want to be feeling more of, especially in our current times. And yet, this says that we're not done. I am personally really curious to see how this plays out, given what is going on in the world right now, especially with the Epstein files. Jeffrey Epstein has his Mars and Venus, or had his Mars and Venus, very, very close to this. I think at like 15 degrees, 15 and 16 degrees of Pisces. So this Mercury retrograde Mars conjunction is happening very close to that. So I would be curious to see if we see more developments in that, especially with the arrest of Prince Andrew that we saw right after the eclipse occurred. So This happened, right yesterday. I'm recording it shortly after the eclipse. And if you can't tell, I'm also a little bit sick. That eclipse happened very close to my moon, so we're doing the best we can here. But there has been a lot going on in the public arena. And while I focus these forecasts more on what happens personally for you in your chart, right, there's still going to be ways in which everything that I say here applies to the collective on a greater scale. And as that is such an important and massive news story right now, I would be curious to see if we see some more developments there because we're already seeing things kick up, for certain people who are involved in that. Now, on March 19th, we're going to move things ahead and we are going to have a new moon in Pisces at 28 degrees. So, like I said, Pisces, you guys are the star of the show this month, right? There is so much happening in this part of the sky, and it really feels like we are just seeding an entirely new approach there. And it's so necessary that we do that, given the fact that we are in new territory in Pisces in a major way, right? Like we've been doing such a different story with Neptune and Saturn there for the past few years. And now all of a sudden, they're gone. And like I said before, this does grant more clarity. This does give us a different kind of time horizon in the ways that we are approaching this area of our life. And new moons are always going to be seeding moments. They are not the moment that we eat the fruit and pick it off the tree and enjoy the harvest, right? It is oftentimes things kind of shifting in a more subtle way or a turning of a page in that area of life that allows us to start writing a different story there or taking a new approach to that area of life. And so, with this new moon at 28 degrees of Pisces, we are seeing that turning of a page. It's also happening around the same exact time that Mercury is stationing direct. So Mercury will go direct the very next day on March 20th, which really feels like, okay, we got to the end of the Mercury retrograde cycle. We have this new moon. Mars is moving through here. There's a lot of things that are kind of pointing towards this being a really important moment for the development of what has been going on in Pisces, right? And so you really want to think about what house this falls in for you. Is it your 10th house of career and public presentation and praxis? Is it your 11th house of communities and friendships and groups? Is it your 12th house of mental health and solitude and immigration, right? Because regardless of where this falls in your chart, you are going to have some type of new beginning. You are going to have some clarity emerging there. You are going to be seeding something, but it is going to play out differently for every single person based on their individual charts. If you have placements towards those final degrees of mutable signs, Pisces, Gemini, Virgo, and Sagittarius, then you are going to be more impacted by this new moon. It might feel a little bit more significant to you. So this is really going to feel like I'm looking forward to this one, honestly. I don't love Illumination being co-present with Mars personally, but it is still going to be one that I think is needed and necessary and is going to feel like a fresh start in a way that's a little bit more obvious than other new moons are, just because of Mercury stationing direct on the North Node at the same exact time. Now, the final decan of Pisces, where this new moon takes place, is it's an interesting one. It's a double Mars ruled decan. It's the final decan of the zodiac. So it brings up this storyline of emotional endings, right? And having a new moon in the final decan of the entire zodiac is like there's a new start that is tied into an ending, right? And I think that we are seeing certain worlds kind of fall away in that part of our chart that we thought we had constructed, dreams that we thought were worth devoting ourselves with Neptune there. And now all of a sudden, those are being cleared away as we have more light in that part of the chart. We have less fog there, and that is going to feel more supportive for understanding where we're at. That final decan of Pisces, the deity that presides over it is called Elpis. And Elpis was this personified spirit of hope that was left over in Pandora's box. Pandora essentially opened this box, and as she did, all of these terrors and horrors and plagues and all of these things went out into the world, right? And that was how humankind started to suffer. Pandora closed the box and then she heard a little fluttering inside. She reopened it and she realized that there was this beautiful spirit inside called hope. And so, even though all of the world was now going to be suffering and having diseases and all of these terrible, terrible things, we as a humankind would still have this principle of hope. And so, that notion of being a light in the dark or finding a silver lining amidst all of the difficulty is inherent to this final decan of Pisces. And I think it's going to feel like a moment of being like, wow, maybe I can hope again in this area of life. Maybe I can, even despite all of the horrors going on in the world right now, all of the difficulties in my personal life, I can do something here. I can build something here. And that I want to invest my time and my energy into doing that because what else am I going to do? Just look around at all the difficulty and never hope for anything better, never try to incite change. I think Mars is kind of far enough away. Mars is at 12 degrees and this lunation's at 28, that it's not activating it in a really aggressive way, but it is giving a little bit of a, okay, let's action plan, let's strategize around how we're going to implement some of these, seeds of hope into our world and into our perspective so that we can move forward and make real change. This final part of the zodiac is also being a double Mars ruled decan, a lot more decisive and action oriented, right? This isn't just like living in the delulu of it all, but it's like crafting strategic action plans alongside the hopes and the dreams and the possibilities that are emerging. Another thing to take note of is that this eclipse means that this eclipse, this new moon means that eclipse season is well and truly over, right? Which hooray, that was I feel like this has been a wild eclipse season, and we have only just started it as I'm recording this. So I am keen to see what else arises in the next few weeks. But this new moon on March 19th really means that we are fully out of that eclipse vortex and we are moving ahead. So things should start to I hesitate to say stabilize because stable is not really the energy of the astrology of 2026, but it does start to feel like it is less intense. Like life is not moving at a million miles a minute anymore, and that we are able to kind of take a breath, ground down, root ourselves into the present moment, take stock of where we are, take stock of everything that's changed, and start taking steps forward in a little bit more of a gentle fashion. That is going to be the new moon on March 19th at 28 degrees of Pisces. Now, on March 20th, the sun is going to enter Aries, which is really going to continue to bring a lot more of a focus and illumination onto that area of our lives. We still have Venus, Saturn, and Neptune moving through that sign. And so now we are going to be doubling up on that stellium and adding the sun into the mix, and the moon is going to join, later the month as well. So there's a lot of focus being poured into this area. Now, the sun is exalted in Aries, which is nice. The sun is a planet that feels really good in this hot, dry sign and feels very emboldened and encouraged to be its truest, brightest, most authentic self. And this is going to really feel like, I think it's going to feel nice in a sense that we've been doing so much Pisces, right? We've been doing so much floating and feeling and intuiting and divining and going with the flow. And then the sun is going to get into Aries with, Venus and Saturn. The moon will be there when it's ingressing and Neptune, and it's going to feel like, all right, it's time to really get moving, right? To take all of these dreams and start implementing them. And this is going to feel a little bit demanding just because of how many planets are here. I know that for me, like all of these planets are going to be in Aries in my 11th house, and I'm taking like a trip to go visit some friends, right? And the 11th house is friendship, and I haven't done that since my child has been born. So it's like a big deal for me. And I can see that how all of these planets moving through my 11th house is like, okay, it's time to take action around this, right? It's time to get out of the space of thinking and feeling and move into a place of doing. And that is very much what's happening for me personally. And I know based on like a couple other people around me and some clients that I've been speaking to, that is seems to very much be the case. That towards the end of March, once the sun gets into Aries, things are just going to start, picking up in a way that allows us to move forward. Now, because Venus is here, this can also bring more of a desire for connection, right? And to relate to other people as a way of understanding yourself and your own self concept. So that could be somewhat supportive, but Sun is also going to be tussling with Neptune and Saturn, especially when it first ingresses. It's going to conjoin Neptune on March 22nd, and then we get the Saturn cazimi on March 25th. So there's going to be, a little bit of a dream and a haze and a confusion and a fog bubbling up on the 22nd when the sun conjoins Neptune, right? It is going to activate all of those ways in which we are idealizing the Aries part of our life right now. And it's going to feel a little fuzzy, but I also think a little fun. Like I think a quick Neptune transit is nice. The long ones, not so much. This is like getting steeped in the fantasy and seeing yourself as the fantasy, seeing yourself as the hero. And I think on an individual level, that can be very supportive, even if on a collective level, we don't really need more of that right now, in my opinion. But everything that's kind of been bubbling up in the Aries part of your chart with these different planets moving through there is now going to really start to feel like it's getting a spotlight cast on it, right? It is going to bring a lot of illumination into that area of life. It becomes unavoidable. We have to look at it, right? And we're going to start developing our self-understanding through the Aries part of our chart. So one of the things that I would kind of ask yourself is like, where is struggle a part of your Aries story? And how might you rewrite that script through consistent action, fierce compassion, and audacious imitations? Like, I think that there is something about the sun in Aries that is very audacious. And it's saying we need to have the audacity to chase our dreams, even when it's hard and challenging and ugly and difficult. And that is the Neptune and Saturn of it all, right? Saturn means that it's going to feel challenging. It's not going to feel like a walk through the park, right? That's not what Saturn's MO is. But Neptune still brings the fantasy and the dream and the idealization. And so having the sun here, it's like, okay, well, how is my self concept and my self understanding informed by the dreams that are emerging here and the difficulties that I am meeting along the way? And how can I devote myself to really improving this area of life so that I can feel like I am moving more authentically in the Aries part of my chart? Now, this is going to be nice for people who are in Leo perfection years because the sun is gaining dignity, which means your time lord is going to be met with better circumstances and a lot more of a capacity to support you. So keep that in mind as well. On that same day, March 20th, Mercury is going to station direct at 8 degrees of Pisces, conjunct the North Node, right? So the story of Mercury retrograde has finished. We are just going to be going through the post direct station shadow period, or not shadow period, but like the revisiting of everything that's kind of come up over the past couple of weeks. So we're not fully out of it, but things are changing, things are turning around. And it's important to remember with any direct station, including Jupiter's that we experienced earlier in the month, that it's not an instant light switch, right? When a planet stations, they are stationed. They are not moving forward yet, right? They are turning around. They are now looking ahead in a different direction, but they are not moving. There is no speed there. And so, because of that, it can look like having clarity, but also that we still need a little bit of a time to make and implement the changes that arose throughout throughout the retrograde itself. So just keep that in mind. It's kind of like a bell curve. We're starting to like taper off out of the retrograde, but we're still kind of dealing with some of those themes. However, it should feel like the headaches that have accompanied this Mercury retrograde are over, which is definitely something to be celebrating. I think Mercury retrogrades in Pisces are the hardest ones for sure. And then you add Mars on top of that, and it just becomes a whole lot more challenging. This is another one where I'm like keeping my eyes on the Epstein files too, because Mars is going to be at 17 degrees conjunct Jeffrey Epstein's Venus as that Mercury stations direct. So potentially seeing some advancements or some developments in that news story as well at this time. Something to keep in mind is that because Mercury is stationing on the North Node and it isn't moving, this is going to put the mind into a place of overdrive, right? That is what the North Node does. It amplifies things. It's like putting a planet on steroids. So when we put the planet of communication and ideation and thinking on steroids, that can cause us to overthink. Now, we have a lot of other things in the sky that are supportive of taking action and supportive of movement, but our mind is not necessarily one of those right now because Mercury isn't moving themselves. And what that can look like is thinking a lot about how to move, thinking a lot about all the things that need to get done, but feeling like there is a disconnect between your mind and your body and the pace that you are moving at and the pace that you want to be moving at, right? It's like this to me is the point where everything starts really kicking off in a way where, okay, Mercury's direct, Jupiter's direct. We have the Saturn cazimi happening in a couple of days. We've got all these planets moving through Aries. It's very action oriented. It's very focused on moving forward, right? We are making progress at this point. There are no planets that are going to be retrograde in the sky at this time, which is massive, right? It's like all systems a go, time to progress and advance and move forward. But Mercury is still kind of slowly readjusting, and that might create a little bit of tension internally as we navigate this. But honestly, it's a relief. It's good news that Mercury is going to be direct. Just be mindful of falling into a pit of overthinking, especially about your emotions on this day, because you're probably not going to get to a place of feeling really stabilized until Mercury moves forward, which they do in just a couple of days' time. So just a couple of days of like feeling a little bit of like inertia whiplash. Now, on the 25th, Saturn is going to conjoin the Sun at 4 degrees of Aries, so quite significant for anybody who has very early degree placements in cardinal signs, right? So that's Capricorn, Aries, Cancer, and Libra. And this is going to bring some clarity around what Saturn is trying to do in the Aries part of our charts. We already know that Saturn wants us to create something there, right? My title for this transit is Painful Creations. What are you willing to pour your blood, sweat, and tears into in order to create something long lasting, in order to do it in a way that is a little bit more scrappy, that maybe has some criticism lobbed at you because that's part of this, right? And to say that, you know what, who cares? I'm going to show up for it anyway. That's that audacity we were talking about before. That's the ability to be bold and to take a risk and to become an authority figure, perhaps before your time or before other people think you're ready, but because you are ready to innovate, because you are ready to trailblaze, because you are ready to go where no one else has gone before. And the Sun conjoining Saturn at 4 degrees of Aries on March 25th highlights what this story is about and how it's going to continue to unfold, and hopefully bring some clarity around what structures, limitations, boundaries need to be put in place so that you can make progress and still have some guardrails up, right? So you don't go totally off the rails trying to just build, 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 build at a fast, fast, fast rate. Because in Aries, we do things with a swiftness, right? There is no stopping and thinking, which is why Saturn doesn't do so well here. Saturn wants to plan. Saturn wants to think about it and then think about it some more and then think about it for maybe another 30 years and then do the thing. And in Aries, it's much less of a, oh, let me sit around and ponder this and figure out how I want to go. It's like, no, 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 no. The only way forward is to do. We'll think about it later, right? This is like a ask forgiveness, not permission kind of perspective, right? So there is going to be, you know, this cazimi I think is going to be clarifying. It's going to be purifying for Saturn, but it is also going to illuminate some morbid stuff because Saturn is morbid. So, because of that, right, there can be a clarification around what must die, a recognition of your limits, and a realization around what boundaries you need to be implementing in the Aries part of your chart, right? And this is going to be an even more significant cazimi because the Sun is exalted and it's the first one we get with Saturn in Aries. So, Saturn is slowly starting to separate from Neptune at this time. This will be the point where they start to have about 3 degrees in between them, which is kind of peak intensity. Anything within 3 degrees is considered more significant, and that goes back to the earliest stratas of the Hellenistic tradition. And now that Saturn has started to separate from Neptune within 3 degrees, and then we get this cazimi, it's almost like the fog is clearing. And now we have this principle of illumination and a spotlight being cast on Saturn that allows us to really see without so much of the fog of Neptune what we're building here. So it's an important one that I'm actually really, really looking forward to personally. Okay. And then we finish up the month on March 30th on a good note with Venus entering Taurus, right? She's sexy. We love her. She's beautiful. She is embodied. She is sensual. And she is going to help us prioritize our own sensory pleasures, our bodily comfort, grounding, reliable, consistent, and sturdy relationships, right? Venus and Taurus encourage us to operate at a slower rhythm, which I think is going to be really nice to combat all of the Aries energy that we are seeing with the Sun and Saturn and Neptune moving through there. And then Mars is going to join the party in April as well. And so having Venus and Taurus is a nice reminder that we can and should embrace a slower rhythm, that we should slow down in order to enjoy life, right? That it is not all about go, 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 but it is also about slowing down, resting, appreciating, right? It's like you could have the best meal in the world, but if you scarf it down in two bites, did you really enjoy it? Was it worth it? Venus and Taurus is going to take her time. Venus and Taurus is going to smell it, is going to savor it, is going to, wash it down with a glass of wine, is really going to feel her way into pleasure. And I think this is a nice reminder that we don't always need to be progressing and striving and accomplishing and achieving, right? Even if every planet is direct and even if we are out of eclipse season and we have this newfound clarity, Venus and Taurus is saying that the clarity is great, but don't get so caught up in the illusion of progress that you forget to actually enjoy your life, right? That you forget to enjoy your relationships, that you forget to enjoy food, anything that brings you that sense of comfort and security and beauty and love and desire. That is what Venus and Taurus is going to be highlighting. This is also a balm for the Taurus part of your chart, right? There's going to be a lot of support that is brought in there, particularly for night charts. But everyone gets a little bit of a boost just because Venus is so dignified in Taurus. So you can expect this to be a little bit sweeter. And if you are in a Venus perfection year, so if you're in a Libra or Taurus perfection year, this is going to be even better for you. If you don't know what perfection years are, I have a article on my blog free for you to check out and read all about that. It's just a timing technique that tells you what planet is more significant for you. And if Venus is the one who's calling the shots for you for this year of life, then the queen returning to her preferred domicile is certainly going to be a balm and a support system, right? This is an antidote for some of the intensity that we are seeing in Aries, and especially some of the intensity that is only going to ramp up once Mars enters Aries as well. This is an invitation into ease. This is an invitation into prioritizing a slower pace that actually, allows you to enjoy. But yeah, that's about it for this month, you guys. And March is kind of finding our way through the storm of eclipse season and emerging on the other side. And once we get to that other side, April is wild. April's kind of like February in the sense that there is so many major moments happening in the sky, some that look a little bit pokey and prickly, and some that look really sweet and beautiful. And we are going to talk about it all next month. So make sure to come back and check in during that time so you can get all of the insights on the astrology to come. I hope you enjoyed this forecast episode. If you did, make sure to like this video, leave a review on your podcasting platform of choice. And if you want to support the creation of the show, you can join my Patreon page on my website, www.kirareiberg.com/exclusive content. There is so many benefits to joining my Patreon page. There is a catalog of over 100 articles. There's multiple video lectures. I give you the best selection of every month. You get priority for my booking link if you want to get a consultation with me. Needless to say, there's a lot that you get for joining, but it also just is the best way to support my work on an ongoing basis and allow me to do things like create this podcast, which takes a whole hell of a lot of time and does not pay. So if you appreciate my work, please go sign up for my Patreon page. It allows me to keep this show going, and I really do appreciate it. All right, guys, take care. I hope March treats you well, and I will see you on the other side. Bye.